Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I am James Pittman, co-founder here at DocketWise. It is March 11th, and we are talking about the crisis in Ukraine. So how U.S. immigration attorneys can assist Ukrainian nationals. I have two very qualified guests with me on the webinar. Igor Voloshen, who is a practicing immigration attorney here in Philadelphia. Igor and I are friends. We've known each other for a number of years. He was actually a very, very early adopter of DocketWise for his firm. We have Roman Zelichenko, another friend who works with us in DocketWise in our outreach. And he is a formerly practicing immigration attorney who now runs GMI Rocket, which is a consulting agency that works with immigration lawyers to build their practice. I'm going to let him explain everything that he does with that, and also the founder of Laborless, which is a tech platform. Let's have them introduce themselves. I also have Chris Williams here, who is our engineering the webinar for DocketWise. Igor, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, James. I am an immigration attorney that practices in the greater Philadelphia and South Jersey area. My practice focuses on family-based immigration and removal defense. I do a lot of asylum cases, affirmative asylum cases. Just came back from one yesterday. Practice takes me all over the United States, but I like this thing that I'm more of a East Coast an attorney on the East Coast. Originally, as James said, I am from a city called Bila Tserkva, Ukraine, which is about 60 kilometers south of 60 to 80 kilometers south of Kiev, which it pains me to say that unfortunately most of my home city unfortunately is in ruins as we speak as a result of Russian aggression in Ukraine. My family is all here. I was a refugee from the former Soviet Union, the Jewish refugee that came to the United States under the Lautenberg Amendment, and built a practice here. I've been here for 30 years. And as James said, one of the first people to join DocketWise, and I'm very happy I did. And I look forward to speaking with all of you guys.
Thank you very much, Igor. Roman, tell us about yourself.
So similar story, except I came from, I was born in a city called Kharkov, which is just close to the to the Russian border. And sadly also is in a lot of ruins. I mean, similarly, my family came here in 90, same under the Lautenberg Amendment, Jewish refugees from the former USSR. I was 2.5, so I, for better or worse, don't really have memories of my immigration process other than the very early days. But yeah, I used to practice immigration law, and I no longer do. I focused on high volume H-1B and sort of corporate work. And now I, as James mentioned, am the founder of Laborless, or co-founder of Laborless, which is a tech platform that automates H-1B compliance. So LCA public access files for any of you who work on that visa type. So automates that, and GMI Rocket, which is a kind of a digital marketing agency, podcast, conference, all this kind of stuff, supporting the immigration industry from a marketing standpoint. So I'm excited maybe excited is not the right word necessarily given the context, but I'm happy to be here and looking forward to learning from you, Igor. And also, again, sharing what I'm hearing on the ground in sort of other ways folks can help outside of just the kind of strictly immigration law perspective.
All right, excellent introduction. So let's get into it. So I want to bring up the topic of TPS, temporary protected status. And as of March 1st, Ukraine was designated for temporary protected status by the Secretary of Homeland Security, Mayorkas. So let's have Igor tell us about temporary protected status and what does this mean for Ukrainians who happen to be in the US? Because that's the first thing, is that the person that you're trying to help had to have been in the US as of March 1st, 2022. Igor?
Sure, James. So for those colleagues of ours who do not do regularly TPS, As you may have heard or have maybe done a little bit of work on, TPS is a program that was enacted in the 1990s under the Immigration Reform Act. It was originally created for countries who were suffering from natural disasters. Nicaragua was one. Venezuela most recently became designated. Syria, Haiti most recently, obviously Sudan, South Sudan, and most recently it is on March 3rd actually, Ukraine was designated as a country to be added to the TPS list by President Biden, and by Secretary Mayorkas. It will apply to all nationals, all Ukrainian nationals who were physically present in the United States as of March 1st, inclusively. And it doesn't matter whether those people are in status, out of status, whether they've been in the United States for a year or 15 years, or have come on prior to the armed conflict beginning, on a tourist visa, and now cannot return back to, a place of hostility and war. Now, if somebody arrived to the United States after March 1st of 2022, they will not be qualified to apply for TPS. Now, among immigration lawyers, and especially Ukrainian immigration lawyers in the United States, we estimate, with help, help with from other agencies, we approximate that anywhere between 35,000 to 70,000 Ukrainians will be eligible in one way or another to apply for TPS. That is a large number of people. That is a very large market, which will require a lot of immigration attorneys to obviously know what they're doing, know how to help these Ukrainians. Now, I would like to stress that for TPS, it doesn't matter whether somebody is currently in some kind of non-immigrant status. They could be students. They could be people who have active H-1B cases. They can be people who are seeking asylum. They can be people who actually have removal orders. I have quite a few Haitian clients with outstanding removal orders, who, after designation of Haiti as a TPS eligible country, applied for TPS. If for many people who have outstanding removal orders, in fact, TPS may work as sort of an intermediary status to keep them from being actually removed. Now, we also know that Secretary Mayorkas designated Ukraine as one of 7 countries where removal orders will be temporarily stayed. That press release came out a few hours prior to the TPS, and basically said that nationals of Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Georgia, Kazakhstan, and I think a couple of more countries, including Romania and Poland, will not be removed out of the United States until further notice. That came out a few hours prior to the TPS notice. So now, I have to say that according to statistics, there really were not a lot of Ukrainians comparatively to other nationals who were being removed. I think in 2021 there was something like 107 total who were physically removed out of the United States. But nevertheless, groups who are considered to be neighboring countries and nationals of those countries who in one way or another are involved in the conflict or are taking refugees from Ukraine will also be under a temporary removal stay. So getting back to TPS, TPS allows the recipient of temporary protected status to remain in the United States for a period of 18 months at a current designation to automatically be eligible for work authorization. So they will be able to apply as part of a joint application, if they will do this online through the ELA system, to apply for the IA-21, which is the TPS application, as well as the I-765, which is the application for employment authorization. The fees, if the fees remain the same as they are for other designated countries, I believe for the most, the most useful group are people between the ages of 14 to 65, I think, or 75, I believe. That's the biggest group we expect to apply. I think the fees are $545 inclusively, including the work authorization. I think the TPS itself is not a feed application, but the work authorization application is. So you're looking at $545 for most age groups to be the fee. They will be able to apply for it. And if I'm correct, I believe based on other countries, the adjudication period is somewhere between 6 to 8 months. At least that's what I'm seeing. Maybe James could add to that. And during that time, obviously nationals and nationals of Ukraine and those who receive TPS will be protected from removal. They will. It's sort of like a deferment status, right? They will be allowed to work here, receive a work authorization and Social Security, and then if and when Ukraine gets redesignated as a country for TPS, as we have seen with, let's say, El Salvador, with Venezuela and Haiti, and Syria, for example, if they redesignate the country, then that will be at the direction of the administration and Secretary Mayorkas, and those Ukrainians who receive TPS will be able to reapply for it. I'm sorry not to be an optimist, but I just don't see how this conflict can end within 18 months to a level where Ukrainians will feel safe to return to Ukraine. Even if, God willing, the armed conflict stops, the country is in ruins. Many cities are in ruins, and I just don't believe it will be a program that's a one-shot deal that will sort of end automatically within 18 months. I anticipate, based on my experience, that we will see at least one more redesignation, and those recipients will be eligible to apply for recertification and redesignation as TPS recipients.
Now, is it important it's important not to miss any renewals. So if you have the TPS, if 18 months from now or a little bit ahead, they announce that it is going to be renewed, you should not miss your renewal. So you have to keep your eyes out for those announcements for renewals. Now, TPS does not, it's great, but it doesn't provide a permanent status. So there's no pathway from TPS to a green card, correct?
Right. There is no pathway to a green card. There are a lot of there's a lot of litigation all over the circuits, various circuits, about whether those people came to the United States uninspected, can use TPS as sort of a grounds to receive advanced parole, then depart the United States, come back, and they will be deemed as having been inspected. In our circuit here in the Third Circuit, I believe there is no decision that allows them to do so. At least I haven't seen it. I believe in the Sixth Circuit, there is a decision that says that advanced parole received through TPS will in fact be deemed as a inspection. I don't think it's going to really apply for many Ukrainian nationals, because unless they came to the United States across the southern border in Mexico and they were paroled or were in fact present aliens, they will not be seeking to really receive advanced parole and depart the United States. Most come actually by plane because of the location and geographical location. But yeah, as James said, it does not lead to permanent residency. It does not lead to a green card. It is sort of a band-aid on a wound. It's a temporary form of relief. But the good part about it is it could be used in conjunction and as a status in conjunction to something else, whether it's a student visa or work visa or even an application for asylum.
And let's talk about what you would actually file when you're applying for TPS. So each family member has to submit their own TPS application.
Okay.
There's no derivative status. Each person applies in their own right with Form I-821. And if you're seeking work authorization, Form I-765 with the filing fee. You have to include proof of Ukrainian nationality, which is typically a copy of their passport or a copy of a birth certificate with translation from the original language, translation into English, or a certificate of nationality. You also must include proof that they were present in the United States as of March 1st, 2022, which can be a copy of their I-94 arrival record. That's typically what you would include there. Anything else and then I'm looking here on the USCIS website. I don't actually see a page set up for Ukraine just yet. So I do not have an exact filing address. Igor, are you aware of an exact filing address yet?
Well, I mean, incredibly, all the TPS applications I've done have been all online. They've
Okay.
all been submitted through the my.ucis.gov portal, which is a new version of the Alice portal. And it allows you to choose a combined I-821 and the I-765 combination application for TPS. It is currently not available on the list of designated countries, and it will not be available, something that maybe James also mentioned, I don't remember, until the program is published in the Federal Register, which we expect to happen pretty much any day. Usually it's within about 30 to 45 days after the date of the announcement. So once it gets designated, once it gets published in the Federal Register, I believe on that same day, later that day, it usually will pop up on the USCIS website as a country that's designated for TPS, and I should be available on the drop-down menu through the portal, and then you can go ahead and do it. Something to add in terms of proof of residency, those people have the I-94, obviously that's great. Those that don't, and came to the United States across the border, were either present aliens or arriving aliens, they may not have the I-94 available. And I guess what I've used previously are tax records, if they have tax IDs, rental receipts, bank statements, any document that shows that as of March 1st, the first designated day for qualification, they were present in the United States. And in my experience, USCIS has been pretty flexible as to what kind of evidence they will receive as a proof of presence. But obviously, if the I-94 is available, that is the prima facie case and proof to show that they were here on that day.
Okay, excellent. Okay, very good. So I think we've covered TPS. We're gonna transition into talking about asylum right now, but I want to give Roman a chance to jump in. And Roman, as a kind of a prelude to our discussion about asylum and country conditions in Ukraine right now, can you tell me what you're hearing as far as conditions on the ground in various places?
I mean, I don't want to take away from the momentum of this conversation. It's obviously pretty devastating. I am aware that on the western border of Ukraine, I'm kind of like a news update here in conjunction with Igor's very substantive legal update. I'm hearing through contacts and other people who I follow who are there. In Western Ukraine, life is actually trying to move forward quite a bit. People are out. I mean, there's a lot of folks from Eastern and Central Ukraine there, but folks are going out on the street, they're going to work, their shops are open, things like that. So it's actually nice because so much of what we hear is the devastation. And of course, there is a lot of that, but it's nice to remember that even within the country, there are a lot of people still supporting one another, housing their friends and family and loved ones. And I guess hoping for this military conflict to end sooner rather than later. So that's definitely, that's the case. I don't know, Igor, if you have an extended family there. I know I certainly do, and I have spoken to them, not in the past couple of days, but folks were sheltering at home and sort of dealing with the bombings at night and hoping and like surviving throughout the day. So it's definitely tough. And I think one of the things that I'll hopefully be able to mention, and again, this is not legal in nature, but hopefully just from a contextual standpoint, that there are potentially now 2.5 million refugees right now coming out of Ukraine to bordering countries. And I know there was a question, I don't know if you're going to get to the questions in the Q&A, there was a question about whether TPS is for folks after March 1st are eligible for TPS. So Igor, I guess I would let you answer that, but just to think about the folks that are in other parts of the world, again, bordering nations and elsewhere, more deeper into Europe, who are refugees, and the fact that even if we as an immigration bar can't support them here with our services, we can work to hopefully support our partners out in Eastern and Central Europe doing this sort of work there. So.
Excellent. And we are going to get to the questions. I just want to get through some more substance, and then I think we're going to take a period where we are going to take a period where we do the questions. But I wanted to talk about those country conditions in the context of asylum, because asylum is a form of relief that is available for a person who is a refugee. They're outside of their country, a country of origin or country of nationality or last habitual residence, and they fear returning to their country either because of past persecution or because of a reasonable fear of future persecution. Now, typically in asylum cases, you need to have a state actor who is doing the persecution. If you're claiming asylum based on persecution or by a non-state actor, then you have to show the acquiescence or inability of the government to protect the person from the non-state actor. And this is interesting in Ukraine, because if you're thinking about claiming asylum from Ukraine, I mean, actually, the Ukrainian government we are on their side. They are our ally. But there are areas of Ukraine that are not under the sovereignty of the legitimate Kiev Ukrainian government. And I'm referring to the areas in eastern Ukraine of Donetsk and Luhansk, which are the separatist areas. Those are operating outside of the constitutional framework of Ukraine. So Igor, in terms of formulating asylum cases, let's talk about both possible basis for asylum as well as the fact that the Ukrainian state is not the hostile actor. Do you have any thoughts on how you would go about formulating asylum claims?
I think James, that's the question of the day. At least that question gets asked probably even more than the question is, when can I finally file my application for TPS? Because a lot of people understand just from reading the news that TPS does not bring them, there's no light at the end of the tunnel for TPS. At the end of the day, they are going to be here temporarily, but what happens after the country doesn't get designated again? So a lot of people, most people that call my office and say, well, can I find, I'm in the United States, I'm still eligible to apply for asylum because I still have not, I've been here for less than a year. So I am statutorily still eligible. Can I apply for asylum? And my answer overall is no. If your only ground to apply for asylum is war or armed conflict in Ukraine, that unfortunately is not grounds for an asylum claim. Now, to file an asylum claim, obviously the claim has to be, with few exceptions, has to be filed within a year after of your arrival to the United States. That is a sort of a hard rule, right? The other one is that you have to show that you are facing imminent threat from law enforcement or representatives of the government on the account of your race, religion, nationality, political opinion expressed or imputed, or that you belong to a particular social group, right? A PSG. Now, there's also a area in the application that allows you to tick off the opportunity to apply for protection under the Convention Against Torture, but that in itself is sort of a withholding of removal opportunity. It doesn't give you a right to remain here indefinitely and doesn't give you a path to a green card and citizenship. So let's come back to the question that James asked. What are my general feelings about putting together an asylum claim? In the context of people who were residing in Lugansk or Donetsk, I mean, could you formulate a PSG? Could you formulate a particular social group that has common characteristics, that is particular in itself, that and claim that well, is it a political opinion per se that was displayed or imputed? Not really, but do they all have common characteristics? The question is, can they relocate, right? Is there opportunity for sort of relocation? In terms of relocation, well, under current context, probably not, because a lot of the country is currently under siege by the Russian Federation. Is the general disgust and aversion and to war, or in the sense, your fear of return or fear of remaining because of armed conflict, is that a political opinion? No, I don't think it is. And I believe that you're sort of between a rock and a hard place. I think unless you can formulate a claim that clearly falls into one of these five, or maybe not so clearly, but at least you could justify that it falls into one of these five protected categories, I think you're going to have a hard time formulating a claim for asylum from Ukraine. However, is it possible? Yeah. And I am going to give you an example. There are several clients that I am currently representing who happen to be, prior to even armed conflict and invasion on February 23rd, 24th, who lived in parts of Ukraine where they were either Russian-speaking parts of Ukraine, predominantly, some of them being actually Roman's home city of Kharkiv. People, Cherkasy, my hometown of Bila Tserkva, which was almost entirely Russophone until a few years ago. If they can show that they, in fact, belong to, for example, that they are members of the Russian Orthodox, or Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchy, and their free practice of their religion, uninhibited practice of their religion, was inhibited or was somehow injured as a result of changing political regime in Ukraine, adoption of the Ukrainian as being the national language. Now, in 2018, in 2016, 17 or 18, I believe, there was an adoption of a new law by Petro Poroshenko that said that any church that belongs and answers to the Moscow Patriarchy must have that stated in the legal name of the church, registered with the state. So now the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Kiev Patriarchy has to be called exactly that. And the one that belongs to and answers to Patriarch Kirill and the Moscow Patriarchy has to have that by name. A lot of these churches under the Ukrainian nationalization were forced allegedly to switch to Ukrainian Orthodoxy or Kiev Patriarchy, or were threatened with violence. I've had those cases, and those cases actually have become successful. Several of those cases were approved at the asylum office stage. I have one that is heading into a individual hearing later this, or I guess later this spring in April. Very careful argument has to be made. And under the current context, those people who are in fact active participants of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchy, they may have a stronger claim, because they may be, for right or wrong reasons, they may be associated with this aggression by the Russian Federation.
Let me just add a little bit of nuance. So let me just provide a little bit of context for people who aren't too familiar with these issues. So Ukraine and Russia are both countries in which Eastern Orthodox Christianity is a prevailing religion. In the last several hundred years, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church had been under the control of the Patriarch in Moscow. And then in the last several years, there had been an increasing movement for Ukrainian Orthodoxy to have its own patriarchate headquartered in Kiev, and to kind of separate and be autonomous. And that's been recognized by some of Eastern Orthodox churches, but not all, and Russia doesn't recognize it. So Ukrainian Orthodoxy is essentially split between those which are loyal to the Moscow Patriarchate and those which are loyal to the Kiev Patriarchate. That's kind of the context for what Igor's talking about. And that's very interesting. So actually, you're saying that the stronger claim, if you're claiming changes in Ukraine to sort of give more strength and recognition to the Kiev Patriarchate could have the effect of allowing religious asylum claims for those Ukrainian Orthodox who are tied to the Moscow Patriarchate, would make their claim stronger. That's interesting. That's very interesting. What I was thinking of was, at what point, now I'm going to switch the gear a little bit, in terms of political opinion cases, at which point do we start treating separatist administrations in Donetsk and Luhansk as state actors for purposes of asylum? Because if you are a supporter of the constitutional government of Kiev, but you are residing in the Russian-speaking areas and the separatist areas, do you have a valid asylum claim claiming that the separatist authorities that are controlling your region are in fact acting as the government, and therefore you could be persecuted for your political opinion in supporting the Kiev government of Zelensky?
Well, in my opinion, I think if we're going to recognize them as state actors, then my question is, why didn't we recognize the Crimean government as state actors? And in my experience, I haven't seen that happen. In fact, I see asylum bar questions from asylum officers that are asking my clients whether they have ever willingly accepted Russian passports, which were mandatory to be exchanged in the Crimea. So I think we're playing a very dangerous game if we try to argue that Lugansk, the DNR, and LNR are state actors, because I think any immigration officer or any immigration judge will beg to ask the question, well, do we recognize these governments as being legitimate governments? And until we don't, then they're separatist groups, right? And the United States definitely does not. I believe no one does except the Russian Federation, maybe China and Belarus, right? Maybe Syria as well. So the question is, I think we have to then qualify them as state actors, which is a dangerous game to do. Now, if we could qualify them as state actors and convince officers and judges that in fact they are state actors, then we go down the list. Do our clients, are their actions, did they speak out against this regime? Did they do anything against this regime? Can their speech be characterized as political speech? If they merely come to the United States and claim asylum because they don't agree with the government of LNR or DNR and they haven't done anything about it, then I'm not sure it's much of a claim. Now, but if they have, then we have to overcome the challenge of relocation. This is the other questions. Can they be considered barred from internal relocation? And unfortunately, in my cases, I haven't seen that. I have seen, in fact, relatively, I'm not going to say easy, but relatively simple procedures to get up and leave to Ukraine proper, right, to Kiev or to other places, for people who were in fact living in the Crimea, LNR and DNR. And those who haven't done that may be considered to not have explored the internal relocation part of the claim.
I was trying to analogize to some of the Central American gang cases where you have gang violence cases which are non-state actors, but the situation is so chaotic that the government cannot prevent the harm inflicted by those gangs. So I was thinking about separatist units, separatist authorities as sort of analogous to those. Are you aware of any cases that's tested that out?
I haven't. The closest I have come to cases from LNR and DNR were in fact cases where people were running away to Ukraine proper from particular separatist actors in the LNR and DNR region, but did not allegedly feel like they could integrate, into central Ukrainian and Western Ukrainian society for one reason or another. I'm going to spare the details, and therefore having the ability to receive an American visa would come to the United States, claim that they're not welcome. They obviously don't want to live in LNR or DNR because they disagree with the separatist regime. But on the other hand, they also cannot integrate into Ukraine proper society, into the larger Ukraine, because they're being mistreated for being, resettlers. Not a very strong claim. And when I see a claim like that, I say, you're going to have a hard time really convincing an adjudicating officer or a judge that you are just simply that you're a refugee for under the definition of INA, and you're not just somebody who is looking for comfortable life rather than a safe life. Let's put it this way.
I was also wondering, one thought I had, and I don't know the answer to it, is whether, if you consider the case in Crimea, if an area comes under the Russian control, and let's just put it bluntly, Ukraine in recent years, in the last couple of decades, has been a much freer country than Russia is, let's put it that way. Russia has much more of a human rights problem in terms of some of its groups, for example, its LGBT community, certain religious groups, Jehovah's Witnesses would be an example, and others do not enjoy the protection of the law in Russia. So I'm wondering if some of those social groups would have a valid claim if their area comes under Russian control. That would be something which would be interesting if there are any claims like that had arisen from Crimea, and if we'll see claims like that evolve in areas coming under Russian control, assuming that Russia is going to dig in and keep control of the territory for some time now.
There's actually a very interesting, you hit the nail on the head. I had an LGBT case actually yesterday that I at the asylum office in Newark. And we actually used one of the supplemental articles that we submitted from the New York Times, talking about what would happen to the LGBTQ community in Ukraine if, in fact, Russia took over Kiev. Because you exactly put it in the best way possible. They're facing a lot. Now, to be fair, treatment of the LGBTQ community in Ukraine wasn't ideal by any means.
Right, not great to begin with.
It wasn't great. But everything is in comparison. In comparison to the Russian Federation, absolutely, they lived a lot more a freer life, right, and they had a lot more protections. But now one of the questions comes up is what would happen to the LGBTQ community in particular if, in fact, Russia took over Kiev and and basically held Ukraine as a captive. And one of the biggest arguments is to return back to the rhetoric of Vladimir Putin about instilling traditional family values. That is his theme. That is his theme since 2000, since early 2000. He has spoken out about. He has said things like to women journalists, well, why don't you ask me this question? Why don't you just go back to the kitchen and continue making borscht? He has said things like this.
Yeah.
He's also openly come out and said things like, a woman's place is not, at work. It's at home. And the same thing happens with the LGBTQ community, who he obviously has allowed is, in places, not only in the periphery, not only in the provinces, but in Moscow and in St. Petersburg. There's a 2013 gay propaganda law, anti-gay propaganda law in the Russian Federation that actually forbids any kind of what the Russians consider to be promotion of gay and lesbian and LGBTQ values. In St. Petersburg, there is a law against public affection of gay couples. So if we assume the worst and the Russian Federation, seizes Ukraine proper and now instill these family values on Ukrainian gay community overall, there is absolutely a very strong claim on the account of the PSG of LGBTQ. And we actually use an article from the New York Times talking about what will happen to the LGBTQ community if, in fact, key overseas. So I think that's a very, very good ground to explore for our listeners.
It is very interesting to see how these situations are going to evolve. And if anybody's interested in going deeper into just some of the abuses that have taken place in Russia, they can go and delve into the biography of Masha Gessen, who is a Russian journalist, female who's gay. And she's a very, very interesting story. She was basically thrown out of, I mean, she basically had to flee. Her life was made so miserable, but and placed in danger. Let's talk about status of the consular posts. Do you, Igor, and perhaps Roman, do you know what's going on with the consular posts in Ukraine and the other Eastern European countries? If you're trying to get a visa, if you're a displaced Ukrainian and you're trying to get an appointment for a visa, whether it's a tourist visa, business visa, something else, are there any allowances being made? Is the situation, I imagine the situation is getting worse. I saw a few pieces of information. I heard that just a few days ago in Budapest, Hungary, the wait for a visitor visa appointment was 275 days, whereas at the U.S. consulate in Chisinau, Moldova, the wait was 329 days. The U.S. Embassy in Bucharest, Romania is not even accepting visa appointments except in emergencies. Literally life or death emergencies. So it looks like going the consular route and trying to get in and get an appointment to get some sort of a visa is not going to be feasible in any short time frame. Have you heard anything about this, Igor or Roman?
Well, I mean, let me say this. This is probably the area that I deal with the most in the last 15, 16 days. Because as James mentioned, about 2.7 million people have left Ukraine. Majority of those people, I would say almost 2 million now at this point, are in Poland, right? And the rest have been absorbed by Hungary, by Slovakia, by Romania, and by Moldova. As you know, overall, some have gone deeper into Europe. So here's the information I have. First, the information came out of the Department of State, and particularly from the Warsaw, from the U.S. Embassy in Warsaw, who came out with a pretty elaborate list that said that for those displaced Ukrainians who are currently in Europe, and namely in Poland, they would be eligible. They could, they were encouraged to apply for B1, B2 visas, which are the visitor visas. They were even encouraged to apply under a different category like C1, D1 crew members, just to get an appointment. And they said, go ahead and apply. And once you get an appointment, we will in fact change the category of the visa type at the time of the interview. As long as you just go ahead and get an appointment. Then they also provided information to contact U.S. Travel Docs, who I guess U.S. Travel Docs, which is the embassy, which is the agency that handles the scheduling, and said, here's where you email us and you tell us, you ask us to expedite your appointment on a humanitarian basis, and we will accommodate you. And then they said this, they said that no matter where you live, where you're resettled temporarily, a priority will be given to immediate relatives of U.S. citizens, that being parents, underage children, and spouses. But for all others who have either friends or business associates in the United States who are U.S. citizens or LPR, legal permanent resident, green card holders, they would still encourage them to apply, and they will take those cases on case by case basis. Now, I've probably had 3,000 people that are somehow related to my clients attempt to do this. And out of 3,000 families, I have seen approvals for three total. One case were two 15-year-old twin boys who were basically in Poland without their parents because the father and the mother remained in Lviv because they're doctors. I also saw, so they were allowed to come to the United States to stay with their aunt temporarily after being grilled by consular officers for about 25 minutes. The other case I saw of a mother of a U.S. citizen who was approved yesterday. And this morning I heard of a case of a woman who was actually in the midst of having her I-130 adjudicated by USCIS by her US citizen daughter. They allowed her to come to the United States on the tourist on the B-1B visa, and she will be arriving tomorrow. So if I can just sort of guess what's happening is, with the exception of these two boys, they're looking to approve these B1 to B1, B2 visas for Ukrainian refugees who the consular officers see some kind of a clear path to adjustment in the United States. This is really what they're doing. For everybody else, I mean, they're forgetting about the immigrant intent, right? They're saying, yeah, they're coming as tourists, but the daughter is a U.S. citizen, the spouse is a U.S. citizen, they'll adjust. For everybody else who have no clear path to remain in the United States beyond their 6-month stay, sayonara, I'm sorry, you guys are potential refugees, 214 denial, 214G basic denial, you stay and you apply for refugee status in Europe. That's what I'm seeing. Now, as far as consular posts, the most information I have is from Poland. I know that the consular post in Lviv is still functioning, but is not accepting any kind of applications other than trying to still get some U.S. citizens out of Ukraine. Emergency passports maybe, but no non-immigrant visas. And the last thing I'll mention is all of the pending I-130s, all of the pending immigrant-based petitions, which were previously scheduled for or were to be adjudicated in Kiev, as many of you know, have now been automatically transferred to Frankfurt, Germany. And we have received new reassignment letters for almost every one of our cases, stating your case will be reviewed in Germany.
Okay, yes. Did you hear that? Immigrant visa cases for Ukrainian nationals are being adjudicated in Frankfurt, Germany. Before we get to others, I want to talk about possible steps that you could take for advocacy, and then we'll talk about some other. We're going to talk about some powers that the president has that could be used, the executive branch, and then we'll talk about other humanitarian suggestions outside of actual legal practice. The Immigration Service, the executive branch, has wide authority to parole people into the country. There could be expansive use of humanitarian parole. There's Section 212D parole authority of the president, where they can basically have the authority to let anyone into the U.S. without a visa for urgent humanitarian or public policy reasons. So expansive use of parole would be one way that certain people who could be let into the United States, for example, people who have other relatives in the United States. Biden could do that through executive order. He could limit it to certain family members or certain people who have certain ties to, who have relatives who have certain ties to the United States. That is something that could be done. Another thing that could be done is a revival and expansion of the Lautenberg program. Lautenberg program, both of our guests mentioned, was begun in 1990. It's basically a family reunification programs that allows some individuals to bring family members to the United States who from the former Soviet countries, particularly religious minorities in the former Soviet countries are allowed to join their relatives in the United States. So that gets reauthorized every year. And it seems to, I'm not sure whether I'm not sure whether it's been reauthorized for 2020 and whether that's taken place before the war in Ukraine broke out, but maybe one of our guests knows the answers to that. And those would be some things that you could call your legislatures and advocate them to use those two tools to try to alleviate the situation. Igor Roman, want to comment on either of those?
Roman?
I'm not very useful here right now.
He's shaking his head, but he's gonna be very useful when we talk about other humanitarian situations.
Well, it's actually a good question about the Lautenberg Amendment. I mean, Roman and I both came under that program as children. I was a little bit older. I was 8. He was 2. But I mean, I really could not talk enough about the Lautenberg Amendment. I'm a very big fan for obvious reasons.
Right.
I mean, it is a great program that would allow refugees from the former Soviet Union, from Ukraine in this instance, to come to the United States and really, I mean, probably get the best head start that they would under any other program, because they come in obviously with exemptions from being public charges. They are given assistance, both financial and housing. There are agencies, resettlement agencies, which take them under their wing. We came as beneficiaries of resettlement efforts of HIAS, which was great. There's also the Lutheran Church. There's Catholic Charities. There are a lot of organizations which sort of receive federal funding to act as resettlement agencies. And I'm not sure whether it was reauthorized this year or not. I do have a couple of people who are waiting for their Lautenberg Amendment based refugee programs from previous years. But I think it would be an excellent way to get to bring some Ukrainians to the United States. The question that we must ask is, how many will we bring, right? And we really need sort of leadership at the highest echelons of our government to really put a number on. Now, people always ask me that every day. The question is, I think the United States, now the wheels turn really slowly when it comes, because there has to be authorization by Congress. It's a slow process. The question is, what are the numbers? When you have 2.7 million of displaced people, I mean, the largest refugee crisis in Europe since World War II, right? The question is, how many will the United States authorize to bring in? Now, we've heard from mayors in cities like New York and San Francisco how they're willing to, and they'd love to take Ukrainian refugees in, and they will find location. But unfortunately, they're powerless because local governments don't have that authority, right? We need leadership from the federal government, from this administration, from Congress, to say, yes, out of the annual quota of refugees that we will bring to the United States, we will allocate 10,000 to the Ukrainians. That's wishful thinking. I'm not sure that's happening. Mm-hmm. I'm just not sure that will ever happen. And I think also the United States is looking at what other countries are going to offer. How much will Canada take? How much will Germany take? Mm-hmm. And once they realize that nobody, that they've sort of allocated everybody else somewhere, then they will announce this formal refugee program, which Jen Psaki, the press secretary for President Biden, has said that this administration is determined to bring Ukrainian refugees to the United States. Now, details, please. Give us some details. Give us some timeframes so we can advise our clients, so we can sort of prepare for this, right? The parole program that James mentioned, I think that's great. I mean, that's happening already. That's happening already. Arriving aliens to the United States from the southern border, in my experience, specifically those that come across the U.S. border in San Ysidro, California, from Tijuana, if a lot of them are being paroled in under 212D5, right? They're being given they're being given I-94s, the arrival departure records with notation DT, right? And they are, and if they are brought to the United States and allowed to be paroled in, they automatically qualify for work authorization and the Social Security number under category C11. Now, the trick is to make sure that the intentions to eventually file for asylum, let's put it this way, or the potential to file for asylum is not clearly or loudly pronounced at the time of being given parole. Because if they do say, oh, we're applying for asylum, we're definitely applying for asylum, then I'm not sure they're eligible for the employment authorizations, because the directions currently state that if your intention is to apply for asylum, then you must wait until you file your I-589 and are eligible to file for your EAD after the elapse of the 180 days. But if you are, if arriving aliens, display fear of return and say, we are asking here to be allowed in, if they are paroled in under 212 D5, before filing for asylum, they would be eligible technically on humanitarian basis to file for automatic EADs, work authorizations, and social security numbers, which is a huge, huge relief for those arriving, because then they are eligible to automatically start working and supporting themselves.
All right, so there you have it. So the parole authority, an extremely powerful tool, which is being used for some people arriving at the border. Let's hope that it can continue to be used. Many Ukrainians would like to be resettled in Europe. It's just much closer to Ukraine. But we will see as the weeks evolve how many of each, how many each country is going to take, and then see a more definitive policy emerge from the Biden administration. And we should stay in touch with our legislature so we can advocate on that topic. Let's go to other humanitarian suggestions, and then we'll take as many questions as we can get to. We have we'll stay over for at least a couple more minutes, as long as our guests can stay. Roman, you want to talk about other humanitarian suggestions?
Sure, and I'm learning a lot, so I'm actually a little bit more of a participant here than a panelist. So thank you, Igor, for everything. Sorry, I'm not very helpful during this discussion, but I'm happy to be here for moral support. I mean, as I said, and as you all probably know, I imagine folks here watching and following the news, well over 2 million, 2.5 million refugees in Europe. Highest, which, as Igor mentioned, resettled, you and myself, my entire family. I worked there as an intern in law school. It's a wonderful organization. They have had a presence in the Ukraine for many, many years. And so, the way that I think about it is, if we can't help directly, even as service providers that you guys all are, if you can't help directly, consider supporting through donations. That's really all I can say. The important thing is, of course, finding donations. Finding places to donate. The one thing that I would say that may be helpful is, of course, you have the large orgs. You have HIAS, you have International Rescue Committee, doing great work on the ground. You have, of course, Red Cross, big organizations. I do challenge everyone here to look for also smaller organizations, especially ones that are based out of Ukraine or in nearby countries that are really supporting on the ground. Nothing wrong with the big organizations, but a lot of it goes to administrative fees. And I think right now, as much money and resources as you can funnel to direct support, the better. I also know that there are a lot of fundraisers through organizations like, what is it called? GoFundMe. So I do have a link here. I can't share links, but GoFundMe has a special page linked to what vetted, vetted fundraisers that are by individuals potentially on the ground or elsewhere. So there was a whole big push for Airbnb. If you all watched that, people just booking Airbnbs that were owned by Ukrainian individuals, not Airbnb companies. So think outside the box. If you can support in one way or another financially, as little or as much as you can, I think that would be really helpful. I follow a number of people who are on social media, some of whom I have met personally, others I don't, who are on the ground. Like, I read about one who was literally at a lot in Poland buying an armored vehicle in order to then bring goods over to Ukraine. And so, for whatever it was, $20,000. And so the organization, they were doing a fundraiser, they raised X amount of dollars, and they were able to buy a vehicle to bring over goods. And that's really direct impact that can help someone get access to food and water and clothing. So I'm just preaching here non-legal things, but just for you all to think about as you're also considering, of course, supporting your clients' families, and just generally watching what's happening from a kind of more political and legal standpoint.
Right, and I'll chime in saying a couple things. We're going to post, Roman can post the link that he mentioned. We're going to be, a recording of today's webinar will be available. There'll be a page set up for that, and in the text accompanying that page, we will have his link and other links. I want to mention also some other great organizations which are doing work. UNICEF would be one. Doctors Without Borders, right? Médecins Sans Frontières, also excellent. I would throw out those two. Igor, do you know of any charities or others that people should think of?
There's a great work that's being done by the Ukrainian American Federation, headquarters of which is actually headquartered here in Jenkintown, Pennsylvania. They're sending a lot of efforts. One of our colleagues, who is also honorary counsel to Ukraine, Irina Mazur, works a lot with that organization. They have a website available and they accept donations. And actually, there's a very good link that is readily published everywhere. And that is a link to the actual Ukrainian central bank, which established an account for people to transfer money automatically, which will go to the efforts of the soldiers. But there are a lot of organizations and a lot of resources, and I highly encourage our colleagues and their clients to really look into it to help people in Ukraine. But on the other hand, I also want to encourage our colleagues to be careful and to advise their clients against certain schemes that are also taking place, because you definitely want to make sure that people are not using this opportunity, this horrible tragedy, as an opportunity to enrich themselves. And the last thing I want to say is, at least here in Philadelphia, where I live and where I work, we have a lot of efforts to actually send supplies to Ukraine, in particular military supplies. We have gathered quite a arsenal to send to Ukraine. And I want to warn our colleagues to warn their clients not to be really careful about that as well. There are certain things that you are allowed to send to Ukraine, and there are certain military things that you are not allowed to send. And you have to make sure that you know what you're doing, because you will have a knock on the door and you will get visit from the FBI. I mean, you cannot send certain types of military equipment, certain types of shields and vests and night vision. There are laws, and there are only authorized exporters that exist, and you must work within the boundaries of the law, not to get yourself and your clients, especially institutional clients, in trouble in an effort to really help Ukraine, but really screw yourself.
Yeah, let's keep it humanitarian and leave the arms production and stuff to the government.
Right.
Let's take as many questions as we can.
James, can I mention
sure.
one small thing? And
Sure.
I'm sorry I didn't mention this, but it's a semi-selfish plug, but also in support of the efforts for Ukraine. So I am organizing an immigration marketing conference at the end of this month, and I'm donating a portion of the proceeds from anybody who attends to nonprofits. And the idea is, I try to donate as much as I can personally, but I'm one person, one small business owner. But my hope is that together we can. It's just a conference focused on marketing for immigration lawyers and professionals, marketing and growth. If you guys want to attend that or learn more about it, just reach out to me on Facebook or LinkedIn or something. But yeah, just wanted to plug that because it's something that.
Is there a URL for the conference setup? What's the webpage for the conference?
Yeah, it's pretty long. It's GMI Rocket It's long. I'm not even going to say it.
Okay, right, we'll put the link in the text.
Yeah, but yeah, I just wanted to say that because it's a win-win. I mean, listen, for immigration lawyers, marketing is not something that everyone folks focus on too much. Ayla doesn't. I mean, and I love Ayla. I speak at Ayla all the time. Doesn't do a great job teaching immigration lawyers, in my experience, both practicing and now, how to grow your business, frankly. So that's kind of why I'm putting this event on, and I wanted to, donate a portion of the proceeds, 10% to nonprofits. So anyway, if you want to join that, win-win for you and to be able to donate.
Excellent.
So just throwing that out there.
Thank you very much. Let's take some of the questions. Will recording be available? Yes, there will be a page set up for that. Barbara has said, I read conflicting rules about dependents of B2 visa holders attending school for primary school while they're in the US. USCIS says no, it violates the terms of the B2, but Department of State website says that dependents of non-immigrant visa holders may attend primary school. Igor, you want to take a crack at this? Any idea?
I mean, from personal experience, it's definitely a violation.
Okay.
I mean, I have dealt with dozens of clients, specifically from Central Asian countries, who have come to the United States for temporary stay with kids, and who have put their kids in school. on B1, B2 visas, not because they really needed to, send them to school, but because they just wanted to get them out of the house, and they wanted them to basically spend time with their cousins and their friends, and not to be bored to death. In future attempts to obtain a tourist visa at the embassy in Tashkent, they were always denied the visa for violation of sending their kids to school. So is it a violation? It doesn't matter what it's being argued as. In practice, in theory, it may not be a violation, but in practice, you will not get your B1, B2 visas renewed. They will they will say that you have violated the status. Now, that's different if you come to the United States and apply for a change of status to put your kids through private school. But public school, which not theoretically, in practice are being funded by US tax dollars and state tax dollars, you're basically considered to have violated the non-immigrant status.
Okay, very good. Next question, can you apply for advanced parole simultaneous with TPS? Igor, contradict me if I'm wrong, but I think the practice is to get the TPS approved first before applying for advanced parole.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. Next one is, do you expect the date of March the 1st, 2022 to be extended? Well, we'll know in 18 months, right? Those designations, TPS is approved for 18 months at a time, and then shortly before it expires 18 months from now, they'll come out with a decision. It doesn't look like this war is ending sometime soon. Even if it ends sometime soon, the situation in Ukraine is not going to be anything normal anytime soon. As Igor said earlier, our guess would be there's going to be at least one redesignation. That would be the best guess right now. Can you apply for work permit online? I-765, is that available through Ellis?
It is available, but only for limited categories.
Okay.
So you have to make sure that it is available. It's available, for example, for OPT students. It's available for certain groups. It is not it's not available for most categories.
Okay. Next person asks, do people need to wait for their actual EAD card, or they can start working after filing the I-821, I-765? You have to wait for the actual EAD card. That's always the rule when you're applying for work authorization. You must have card in hand before you start working. Any changes for current asylum seekers? I think we've covered it. I mean, that's a very broad question. So I can't answer any more specific. Any changes for current asylum seekers? Too general. Sorry if I missed it, but will Ukrainians that enter after March 1st be eligible to apply? Well, see, that's the thing. The answer is no. You have to be in the United States as of the day of designation for TPS. So if you arrive a day later, you're out of luck. It's just a bright line rule there. Is TPS, okay, there we go. Next question. If someone applies for TPS, can they, okay, same question. You have to have the EAD. About 6 months processing time, generally. What's the possible maximum period of time can be redesignated to in increments of 18 months? There isn't any. It's totally discretionary on the part of the Secretary of Homeland Security. Haiti was redesignated numerous times. Liberia, I can recall Liberia being designated for over 10 years, if my recollection is correct.
Absolutely.
How likely is it to get asylum for TPS holders while on TPS? It just doesn't, the one thing is not related to the other. The fact that you have TPS doesn't affect your eligibility for asylum. Your asylum claim has to be made based on whether you fit the criteria laid out in Section 208 of the Immigration and Nationality Act. You can't be barred because of the 1-year bar for filing. You have to fit within the definition of a refugee, etc. You can't have been firmly resettled elsewhere. Let's see here. Okay. Let's see, please. Okay. Do you expect humanitarian parole will be offered? We've talked about that. What about dual nationals who entered the US on a non-Ukraine passport? Would that be an issue? Dual nationals who entered the US on so they have, no, if you have Ukrainian nationality and another nationality and you use the other passport to enter the United States, you still have, if you are a Ukrainian national and you have proof of that, you're eligible for the TPS. the fact of which document you use to enter does not affect the fact that you are a Ukrainian national.
But you may
Um,
be, but you
go
may
ahead.
be, but it may affect your eligibility to apply for asylum.
It may, how so, Igor? So what are you getting at?
Well, I'm getting it if they came to the United States on a different document.
Ah,
and they're-
right. You
And they're
have,
citizen
exactly.
of additional country, then
There
they
you
would
go.
go to that country.
You don't need asylum in the US, just go to the other country where you're a citizen.
Yep.
Okay. Question for Igor. Did you mention it's possible to apply for TPS for citizens of neighboring countries of Ukraine? He did not say that, no. If the TPS holds H-1B status, should they continue to maintain their H-1B status? So the TPS does not affect your underlying, if you have an underlying legal non-immigrant status, it doesn't affect it. You have TPS layered on top of that. And then you can work under, in other words, if you have an H-1B, you're authorized to work for the petitioning employer. If you got TPS and you got an EAD through TPS, that's a general EAD that allows you to work for any employer. So it's actually more advantageous because you're no longer, your right to work is no longer tied to your H-1B petitioner. Can a person change status from just TPS to a non-immigrant status or to a green card if they're otherwise eligible? Yeah, if you're otherwise eligible, having TPS puts you in legal status, and provided that you haven't done anything which disqualifies you from being able to change your status, you are able to apply to change or adjust status from TPS. How will TPS help someone who is waiting a few years for asylum interview and already has work authorization? Well, as Igor said, and as we said, it kind of places you in a status where you will not be removed. So if your asylum case is pending, if you have asylum pending in the court, you may, now, Igor, do you know if they're allowing administrative closure of cases that are, you mentioned stays of removal. Are they allowing administrative closure of removal cases if you have TPS?
I'm not sure they're allowing for administrative closure based on TPS alone, because TPS is a subject to redesignation. What happens when it's not redesignated? Then the person obviously is not. So at least I haven't heard about.
I have seen in the past. I had seen cases where once TPS was granted. Now those were back. Now that's several years ago when the rules for administrative closure used to be more generous than they are now. Now the Trump administration really restricted the government's ability to administratively close cases. So you'll need to double check that. If a Ukrainian is outside of the United States, what are the chances to get admitted with humanitarian parole? Do you want to address that?
Yeah, so actually I get asked that question a lot. And to be honest with you, I had to research it myself because I haven't had that happen to me. But it looks like the unanimous agreement among in the immigration bar is that you can ask for humanitarian parole by filing application I-131, and with that application, you should attach usually a document that shows that after they arrive to the United States on humanitarian parole, what will they do afterwards? So it is an excellent method to get people who are currently awaiting adjudication of their I-130s and who are immediately eligible for adjustment to the United States. In fact, the humanitarian parole application, I-131 in the direction requires that you provide proof of, let's say, I-130 filing for petition for alien relative or receipt of the same. So if there is a clear path, if the United States government will see that after they bring somebody on humanitarian parole, they will see a clear path on how they will adjust, then yeah, I think it's worth doing. And there are options to do that, with the embassy. But humanitarian parole will not be given as a replacement for a B1, B2 visa. It's a different ball game. It's a different element.
Good answer. Next person asks, do you think that someone who currently has DACA, if they apply for TPS and receive it, should they still keep up with DACA to be safe, especially if TPS is not extended for more than the initial 18 months? Well, you're kind of answering your own question. I mean, yes, I think my opinion is if you have DACA and you're going to apply for TPS, I think it's worth the trouble and worth the cost to keep both of those going, because each one of those is going to have a different destiny and a different endpoint.
Right.
You know, you don't know whether TPS is going to be redesignated. You don't know what fate DACA will ultimately have. So why not have a second, insurance policy?
Right.
Do you think someone who, let's see here, I'd like to hear what third country options you are recommending if someone does not have a way to get to the US. I know Canada and Ireland have waived visas for entry, but not sure if those are in effect yet or how viable they are for people who fled without a passport. I don't have any specific information about what Canada and Ireland are doing other than what's in the media that you can easily Google. Igor, can you comment on any of the other countries?
All I know are rumors, and if the rumors are true, then I can tell you that our northern neighbors are a lot more generous with their immigration benefits than the United States. I heard rumors that people can apply for basically a 2-year uninhibited entry to Canada, where they will be given an automatic work authorization and allowed to stay, no questions asked, for 2 years, after which they will have to apply for some kind of immigration benefits. I can't prove that. I don't know whether that's true or not, but it is definitely worth exploring.
Next person is, can a Ukrainian on a visitor visa apply for adjustment of status through a U.S. citizen daughter? Well, yeah, I mean, yes. And the fact of being Ukrainian doesn't make any difference there.
Yes.
Okay. Are folks who initially entered the U.S. on a C/D crewman visa eligible for TPS?
Yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm. I have a potential client who's an independent Russian journalist. She has spoken against the war and Putin's government in general. She's currently in J1 status on a Fulbright Master Scholar. Any ideas what options she may have in terms of the 2-year home residency requirement?
She could call me.
Isn't there, I thought that there was, am I not correct that there's an extreme hardship ground for the J waiver?
Yeah, but I'm not sure the ground applies to a asylum application.
Well, she's saying she's spoken against the war and Putin's government in general.
No. I'm talking about the 2-year, the 2-year home requirement.
Mm-hmm.
It does not apply to an I-589.
No, it doesn't. It's
right. So if she applies for asylum, and it sounds like she has grounds to apply for asylum, then who cares about her 2-year requirement? She's not adjusting. That requirement would apply. She would need a waiver from the Department of State if she was attempting to, let's say, adjust based on the marriage or change her status. Then you need a waiver from the Department of State. But if she's applying for asylum and displaying a credible fear of return or a well-founded fear of return, she can apply for asylum without having to worry about the 2-year requirement.
right. So you probably don't even have to worry about the J waiver.
That's correct.
Exception to the 1 year where country conditions have changed. Yeah, that's true. If there's change of country conditions, that's, that can toll because you didn't need asylum until the country condition changed. That would be your argument for why you didn't file within 1 year. So there would be tolling. Right. It's not easy to get that, by the way. I thought nationals of Donetsk and Luhansk were not able to enter the United States. Igor, do you know anything? Are people hailing from those two regions? Are they treated differently in terms of admission?
As long as they have a Ukrainian passport.
That was what I thought.
And as long as they receive, then I'm not sure there's a difference. Now the question is, if they receive some kind of DNR or LNR document, then yeah, I mean they're not going to be allowed to cross the country, right. Cross the border anywhere. Same thing applies for people who live in the Crimea. Some of them are my clients. If they have a Ukrainian passport and they can cross the border into Europe, then nothing inhibits them from coming to the United States potentially. If they have received a Russian passport while still maintaining the Ukrainian passport, that's a whole different story. Now that's a bar. Okay, they will not be given asylum in the United States. They also will not be most likely allowed to enter because they are technically have accepted Russian, they've accepted citizenship of an enemy, basically.
There you go. Asylum can be filed more than 1 year after arrival if there are changed country conditions. Okay, we said that. However, Okay, all right. Somebody's just giving a comment. It wasn't a question. Can the halt and removals because of to certain countries alone be considered good cause to try to postpone an individual hearing for clients from those countries? I
Yeah,
think so. I think you would try. You should try it.
I'm
I would
I'm
try it.
I'm doing that as my paralegals are doing that as we speak.
Igor's writing up filings as we're speaking. Okay. Are any experiences with U.S. consulates in Eastern Europe willing to process Ukrainian nationals' visitor visa applications? We mentioned that, right? They're very backlogged. Igor told you that. They've sort of got the criteria stood on its head where they're
Yep.
approving people who look like they're going to adjust in the U.S. That's the inverse of the way that it's supposed to work.
Yeah.
Okay. On that note, okay. Yep. You've been approached by Russians actually seeking asylum from Russia due to speaking against the war in Ukraine. There you go.
Yep.
Well, that's political opinion. That's pretty straightforward.
Yep.
Let's see. Okay. Ethical implications of charging a fee to prepare TPS or asylum for Ukrainians currently. Well, you know, your ethical guidelines is as an attorney, you don't charge an excessive fee based on the service that you're providing, your experience level, and the geographical location that you're operating within. You're, as an attorney, you're also an independent professional person that has to support himself or herself. So yes, you can charge a fee. It can't be excessive. Is it more likely that Russians who live in Ukraine and are targeted by the Russian military converting or leaving Russia to be eligible for asylum as a political social group?
I actually have a case like that.
Okay.
And it is very unclear because the case I'm talking about is of a woman who had LPR status in Ukraine, Russian national, married to a Ukrainian citizen who is obviously was mobilized, cannot leave the country. She left the United States. She left Ukraine to Bratislava, Slovakia. Yesterday, she attempted to rip up her Russian passport in front of a Russian embassy. She was beat up and arrested. They let her out, and she is refusing to obviously go back to Russia. And the question is, will she be given some kind of reprieve, some kind of a humanitarian basis to enter the United States or other country? She's technically a citizen of the Russian Federation, but has an LPR status in Ukraine. It is still very undetermined. But I think even though if she can get into the United States, I would be willing to try that case for asylum, because maybe there's no previous harm or past harm, but I can definitely argue there's going to be future harm. So it would be creative lawyering, but I think she may have a good claim.
There you go. Are Russians being targeted for political views for standing up or fleeing with Ukrainians more eligible for asylum than Ukrainians simply fleeing the crisis? Yeah, I think we answered that. I mean, if you're Ukrainian simply fleeing the crisis, that by itself is not grounds for asylum. However, dissent against the war by a Russian in Russia, you may have if it has repercussions on you, you'd have a potential claim.
Yep.
How about the fact that the legitimate government cannot and will not protect them from persecution? That's kind of what I was getting to, analogizing to the gang violence cases. We'll have to see how this evolves. I mean, I would review all the cases that have to do with non-state actors, and then try to compare them to the facts on the ground in Ukraine. Is Russia's goal to take over Ukraine, in which case they will be the government? It looks that way, right? They do want to install a puppet regime. It's not the first time they tried either in the last couple decades. What about a claim by Russian separatists that they're being persecuted by the Ukrainian government? Potentially. I mean, yes, potentially. That's legalistically speaking, regardless of what you may personally think about it, that is potentially a viable claim. Yep. Do you think that this might qualify as political opinion? Yes. I would think that it's more effective to argue that the separatist governments are groups that the government is unwilling or able to control. Okay, yes, we said that. Average attorney fee for filing TPS, we can't answer that here, but please contact your local colleagues, either reach out to them through social media or through your local ALA chapter and ask them confidentially. Do you have any recommendations for getting family members of U.S. citizens to the U.S.? especially for preference categories where a visa is not immediately available. Yeah, there's not really a simple way to circumvent the visa process. That's why we were talking about the parole authority and the potential for expansion of the Lautenberg program. Igor, you want to add anything else about this?
Well, yes, you're absolutely right. And it will be difficult, but if the preference category in question involves a US citizen, that is, for example, if you have filed a petition for alien relative for your brother, your sister, for your adult child, adult married child, for example, or adult single child, and the I-130 was approved, these people are displaced and currently awaiting, then I would encourage you to contact your congressman or your senator's office, describe the vital humanitarian need. They have liaisons available with the Department of State, and then get their assistance in contacting the National Visa Center and on a humanitarian basis, expediting the adjudication. Now, am I optimistic about the success? Not really, but it's definitely worth a try, especially when you have maybe a year or two still waiting in queue rather than 14 years. You know, I believe it may work. It may actually, rush them to call somebody like that for an interview now rather than 5 years later.
All right. Well, there are a few more questions, but we've kind of reached the end of the time, and some of the questions I've noticed a lot of them are reduplicative. So if we didn't get to your question, I apologize. There were hundreds of questions here, and we are at the end of our time period for the webinar. But I want to thank my guests, Igor Voloshen and Roman Zelichenko, for joining me. I think it's been very productive. Let's all hope, wish, pray, etc., that the situation's alleviated and this war comes to a close sooner rather than later. Let's do everything we can. Let's continue sharing ideas with each other. I want to thank Chris Williams at DocketWise for engineering the webinar today. And look for the page with you'll get a link to the recording of today's webinar. Thanks everyone who attended. We appreciate it. Igor, once again, thank you.
Thank you.